Honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And congratulations on your appointment to the chair again. Mr. Speaker, I'll be splitting my time with the Honourable member for Richmond Centre. Today, it's once again such a great honour for me to be able to rise in this House to participate in our democratic process on behalf of those who elected me from the greatest riding in all of Canada, Kitchener-Conestoga. And it's with my constituents' best interest in mind that I speak to the government's speech from the throne. As the MP for an urban-rural riding, I am concerned about the glaring omission of any mention of agriculture. Yes, agriculture is important to my rural communities in my riding, but it's also very important to the urban communities that I represent as well. Mr. Speaker, farmers do feed cities. In my riding, there are over 1,200 farms, approximately 1,400 in all of the region of Waterloo, accounting for $473 million in gross receipts in 2010. Farmers are professionals. They want to meet their social obligations in protecting the environment, protecting the health and welfare of animals, and providing the best quality food and products for their families, for their communities, and for the world. The family farm is the foundation of the Canada we love today. Products have evolved and technology has advanced, but one thing remains constant. From before sunrise to long after it goes down, Canadian farmers do the hard work that feeds our country. The Canadian agriculture and agri-food sectors account for more than $100 billion in economic activity every year and employ more than 2 million Canadians. The importance of agriculture to our national interest simply cannot be overstated. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 1 in 8 Canadian jobs depend on agriculture. Those in primary agriculture, food processing, horticulture, farm markets, and more. By the way, Mr. Speaker, I hope that you and all of my colleagues have taken the opportunity to visit the world-famous St. Jacob's Farmers Market, which is in my riding of Kitchener-Conestoga. Mr. Speaker, over 100 years ago, in 1900, one Canadian farmer produced enough food for 10 people. Today, one farmer feeds more than 120 people. Mr. Speaker, these are not people the government should be ignoring when setting out its agenda for this coming session. The Liberal government should be aggressively pursuing new markets for our producers while protecting supply management, should be investing in cutting-edge agriculture and agri-food technology, leveling the playing field for our producers so they can better compete with trading partners, making science-based regulatory decisions, ensuring an effective and efficient transportation system, and all the while keeping taxes low for these producers and processors. Our party has always placed high value on our agricultural sector, and we will continue to do so while in opposition. Unfortunately, in 3 months since the election, we have already seen enough inaction on this and a number of other files to make Canadians uneasy about the future. In terms of the economy and taxes and deficits, Mr. Speaker, our leader said it best in her reply to the throne speech when she said, quote, "We trust Canadians, and the money they work so hard for is better left in their own pockets than in the hands of politicians here," end quote. I know the constituents in my riding would prefer to invest and spend their own hard-earned money rather than have government determine how they can or cannot spend it. 3 topics I would like to focus on in this section are trade, the government's commitment to lowering the TFSA limit, and their promise to run a large deficit to increase infrastructure funding. First on trade, I am very happy to hear the Liberal government has signed the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. However, the government needs to ratify the TPP at the earliest opportunity, as it is in the best interest of all Canadians. The TPP provides access to new markets with which we don't currently have free trade agreements, such as Japan, the world's 3rd largest economy. Ratifying the TPP will preserve Canada's privileged access to our largest trading partner, the United States, and strengthens our partnership under NAFTA. Ratifying this deal is especially important to our agriculture sector, and of course, again, I'm thinking of Waterloo Region farmers. The TPP will allow these hardworking farmers preferential market access for their products, from great Canadian beef and pork to sweet Canadian maple syrup. By the way, Mr. Speaker, Kitchener-Conestoga is home to the Elmira Maple Syrup Festival, which is the world's largest one-day maple syrup festival and will be held on April 2 this year. By generating opportunities for Canadian agriculture and agri-food exports, TPP will protect and create jobs and enhance economic opportunities and financial security for Canadian business, workers, and their families in all regions of Canada. As it relates to the tax-free savings accounts, the Conservative Party is proud of our introduction of TFSA that encourage Canadians to be responsible in saving for their own future needs. Mr. Speaker, a few days following the speech from the throne, my office received a phone call from a senior who begged and pleaded that I, along with my office, do everything that we can in order to ensure the Liberal government does not reduce the limit that she can contribute to her primary source of savings. This woman, by the way, was not someone who had a large income, contrary to what the Liberal government would like Canadians to believe. Many Canadians have come to rely on these savings accounts when planning for their future. These negative changes proposed will make life less affordable for Canadians who are trying to save for their vulnerable years. In terms of infrastructure, in December, I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister and key members of his cabinet regarding commitments he had made to infrastructure funding, specifically in my riding. During the campaign, our current Prime Minister assured them that an elected Liberal government would fund two-way, all-day rail link to Toronto so that commuters can travel to and from the region throughout the entire day. I would urge this Liberal government not to renege on their promise as their Ontario counterparts continue to drag their heels. As we all know full well, these projects do come at a great cost, and the government made it clear in their platform that they will be taking the surplus that the previous government left them and entering into a deficit. The problem is that was once a promise to keep the deficit to $10 billion has now ballooned to $20 or possibly even $30 billion. Every week we hear of more holes in the Liberal costing of their platform. More recently, a report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer contradicts the Liberals' claim of a cost-neutral tax increase to Canadians. Instead, the PBO has found that it will cost the government upwards of $100 million per year to fund this so-called tax-neutral measure. It's clear to Canadians that there's only one party that will always look out for hardworking taxpayers, and that is our Conservative Party. Last, Mr. Speaker, we heard in the speech from the throne a commitment to keep Canadians safe and to strengthen relationships with our allies. Conservatives have said that in order to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies, Canada must maintain our commitment to the air combat mission against ISIS and leave our CF-18s in the fight. The Prime Minister has still not explained how pulling CF-18s fighter jets out of the fight against ISIS is helpful to our coalition partners. If Canada truly wants to strengthen our relationship with its allies, this is not the time to be withdrawing our CF-18s. We should be standing side by side with our allies. The Canadian Armed Forces and the Royal Canadian Air Force have been carrying out both training and airstrikes successfully in the region for almost a year. The suggestion that Canada does not have the resources to do both is simply not consistent with the contributions we've already made, and it is a disservice to Canada's strong record. The brave men and women of Canada's armed forces are always willing and able to do the heavy lifting, which includes degrading and defeating ISIS, a terrorist group that is committing mass murder and unspeakable atrocities. It's clear that remaining in the coalition fight against ISIS in a combat role is therefore in the best interest of Canadians both here and abroad. And it's also, Mr. Speaker, for the refugees that we have welcomed in our community with open arms and hearts that we must remain in this fight. For many of them, a safe and stable homeland remains their ultimate desire, and it's our job to provide that for them, so that if they wish, they may return to their country of origin and live free from oppression and fear of death. Mr. Speaker, the constituents of my riding are expecting this government to work hard for all sectors of the economy. They must address what they plan to do for our farming communities. Furthermore, they expect this government to steer our Canadian economy in a time when global markets are fragile, while stewarding their hard-earned tax dollars well and maintaining the principle that you should not spend money you do not have on things you cannot afford. And last, as many of our closest friends around the world ramp up their contribution to the fight against this barbaric group, ISIS, Canadians expect that we will stand alongside with our friends. Unfortunately, these have not been addressed in the speech from the throne. It's my hope, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal government will see the error of their ways and take action on behalf of our global friends. on behalf of our small and medium-sized business and expanding trade opportunities, and especially on behalf of our vital agriculture sector to ensure that family farms can succeed and that Canadians continue to have access to the very highest quality food in the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate the member opposite on his speech, and I have been to St. Jacobs a number of times. I have family in your riding, and it truly is a wonderful place to visit. I wanted to talk a little bit, I do come from a rural riding, and I want to talk a little bit about the member's comments and ask a question in terms of the agriculture community. I've watched over the past 10 years as the supports like the Agri-Stability Fund have been cut, and needed supports for our farmers and agriculture communities have been reduced and in some cases disappeared. And I'd like to ask the member opposite, what if he will work with our government to make sure that our agriculture community and our farmers receive the supports they need to continue to feed our communities and indeed our country. Thank you.
For Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her question and especially welcome her back again to the great village of St. Jacobs. I think the biggest difference, Mr. Speaker, between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party as it relates to agriculture is that in the Conservative Party, we believe that farmers want to farm the land, not the mailbox. And for so many years, farmers were dependent on subsidies and top-ups and all of those kinds of programs. What we have done, Mr. Speaker, we've invested in scientific research so that farmers can produce high-quality food using less pesticides, increasing their yields, and providing traceability programs so that if and when an unfortunate incident occurs, we can quickly address those problems. And the farmers that I speak to in my area, they're thrilled with the investments that we have made in helping farmers do their job better. They have no interest in continuing to rely on government subsidy. But I am willing, and more than willing, to work with the party opposite in improving the lives and the viability of our family farms.
Question commentaire. The honourable member for London, Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to remind you that the funds, the money that is given to government in taxes is intended for national programs, not politicians, and one of our most precious national programs is health care. And with that in mind, today we have the pleasure of hosting the Canadian Health Coalition, and they have some asks for this new government. Firstly, they would like to see a new 10-year agreement between the federal government and provinces in regard to stable funding for health care. They would like to make sure that we have a national drug policy strategy, a national strategy for the care of seniors, and a 25% amount, a contribution from the federal government for health care. And I wonder if my colleague would support those asks.
Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague. For a minute there, I thought she had forgotten that I'm not part of the government right now. But I do want to say that I am proud of the investments and the initiatives that our government has taken on the health file. There's been many statements of misinformation that have been made over the last number of years in terms of so-called health cuts. Our government increased funding to provinces by 6% per year. That certainly is not a cut. We also committed to continuing to invest going forward. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to do anything we can to advance the health care of Canadians. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, if you examine my record, you will see that over the last number of years, I've worked hard on issues such as mental health initiatives, suicide prevention, palliative care, and I'm certainly plan to continue those efforts as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Provencher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to congratulate my colleague from Kitchener-Conestoga on his re-election and being back at the House here on this side of the House with him. Further to the member opposite, talking about agriculture, I too come from a very agriculture-minded riding, and certainly agriculture is a very high priority for me and the folks that are back home and that have supported me and want me to represent them here. And so I'd like to ask the member What kind of things would you like to have seen in the throne speech? What kind of things were missing that agriculture should have been mentioned in the throne speech, and just give them an opportunity to expand on that?
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I did touch on this during the speech, urging the Liberal government to be more aggressive in pursuing new markets, for example. Mr. Speaker, I can't tell you the difference it makes having the proposition of the Canada-EU Free Trade Agreement, the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement, the TPP. When it comes to exporting agricultural products like pork and beef and the high tariffs that are currently on those products, that's the kind of fight that we need to see from the Liberal government in terms of standing up for our farmers to be able to access new markets. As it comes to scientific research, Mr. Speaker, I alluded to this earlier in my response to my colleague across the way. We have to give farmers the research tools to help them develop the new quality, higher quality of their products, whether it's livestock or field crops. And our government has done that, and many of our farmers are contacting me to let me know that they've been happy with that initiative, as I said earlier, rather than having them rely on government subsidies and top-ups that are not helpful in the long run. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.